In a city that worships beauty, death can hide in plain sight. 500 witnesses, all dressed for music, none prepared for murder. Elena Vasiliou, the Silver Lark, the greatest voice in Europe, wearing a gift worth a fortune. They never noticed the diamond at her throat until it began to kill her. Her final note was meant to be perfection, but it lasted too long. Then, her hand moved to her throat, not as drama, but as instinct. The note wavered, then broke, and before the applause could begin, she fell. The hall erupted in confusion, but one man remained still.
That was not performance. That was murder.
The Diplomat and the Dying Lark.
Welcome to the Hidden Library. Tonight's volume opens in a grand concert hall where a celebrated soprano falls mid-aria and a diamond brooch vanishes before the applause has faded. If you value stories drawn from shadowed shelves, like and subscribe to support the Hidden Library. And tell us in the comments where you're listening from as this chapter begins. Now, turn the page and enter The Diplomat and the Dying Lark. Chapter 1. The Silver Lark's Final Song. The program rustled in my hands as I settled into my seat. Row H. Stalls. Not the most fashionable position, perhaps, but Poirot had insisted upon it with that particular emphasis he reserved for matters of acoustical science. "The sound, Hastings," he had explained that afternoon. "It arrives at this position with perfect clarity, not too near to overwhelm, not too distant to lose the color of the voice." I had learned long ago not to argue with my friend on such points. The Royal Albert Hall hummed with anticipation. London society had turned out in its finest. Jewels caught the gaslight, silk rustled against velvet, and the air carried that peculiar mixture of expensive scent and program paper. And I recognized several faces from the society columns. "You observe, my friend?" Poirot murmured beside me. I followed his gaze upward to the boxes. The usual crowd, I should say. "Precisely. And in the third box from the stage, you see?" I craned my neck. A distinguished gentleman with iron-gray hair stood speaking to a woman whose elegance struck me immediately. She wore dove-gray silk, her dark hair dressed in a simple style. "Sir Adrian Markham," Poirot said quietly, "of the Foreign Office, and Lady Frances, his wife. You know them." "I know of them. Which in some cases, mon ami, is more valuable. Sir Adrian has recently returned from certain delicate negotiations in Eastern Europe." Before I could inquire further, the house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the vast space. The orchestra began its introduction, something Italian, I thought. Then she appeared. Elena Vasiliou stood at center stage as though she had materialized from the music itself. Her gown was silver tissue that shimmered with each breath, and at her throat blazed a diamond brooch shaped like a bird in flight. Even from our position, I could see it catch the stage lights, scattering brilliance. "The Silver Lark," someone whispered behind us. "Worth £10,000 a performance." "15," another voice corrected, "and worth every penny." The music swelled. Madame Vasiliou drew breath, and the first notes emerged, pure, crystalline, impossibly controlled. I am not a sentimental man, but I confess that voice affected me profoundly. Beside me, Poirot sat perfectly still. His fingers moved slightly, not with the music, but as though conducting some private calculation. The aria progressed. Madame Vasiliou moved across the stage with grace that matched her voice. The diamond lark at her throat blazed with every turn, and I found my attention drawn to it repeatedly. During a pause, I glanced again at the Markham box. Sir Adrian leaned forward, his opera glasses trained on the stage with an intensity that seemed excessive. Lady Frances sat back in shadow, her face unreadable. The final aria began. Madame Vassiliou moved to the front of the stage, her hands clasped before her. The orchestra fell to a whisper, then to nothing. Her voice rose alone, rising, impossibly sustained. Then her hand moved to her throat. At first I thought it a dramatic gesture, but something in the movement jarred. A lack of grace, a sudden rigidity. The note continued. Her eyes widened. Her other hand clutched at the diamond brooch, fingers closing around it convulsively. "Poirot," I began. "I see it," he said sharply. The note wavered, strengthened impossibly, then broke. Elena Vassiliou swayed where she stood. For one frozen moment she remained upright. Then, with a terrible grace, she collapsed. The audience gasped. Applause began uncertainly in the upper galleries. Surely this was theatre. But Poirot was already on his feet, moving towards the aisle. I followed, my heart hammering. Confusion reigned. Some applauded. Others sat frozen. In the Markham box, Sir Adrian had risen, his face white in the reflected light, his hand gripping the rail. We reached the side of the stage as the curtain descended. The conductor stood in the wings, calling urgently for a doctor. Stage hands rushed past, and a woman in black wrung her hands. Poirot pushed through the gathering crowd with authority. I kept close behind, using my height to clear a path. We emerged onto the stage. Elena Vassiliou lay where she had fallen, the silver gown spread around her. Her dark hair had come loose. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, and at her throat the diamond lark blazed on. A portly gentleman knelt beside her, his fingers on her wrist. He looked up as we approached. "I am Dr. Bly, the theatre physician," he said quietly. "I'm afraid there is nothing to be done. The lady is dead." A murmur ran through the onlookers. Someone sobbed. Poirot stood very still, his green eyes moving across the scene with peculiar intensity. He noted the position of the body, the arrangement of the hands. His gaze lingered on the diamond brooch, and then moved to examine her fingers where they had clutched at her throat. "You are certain, Doctor?" he asked. "None whatsoever." Dr. Bly rose to his feet. "I suspect the heart. The signs are unmistakable. Sudden, catastrophic failure. These artistic temperaments, you know. The strain of performance—" "Quite," Poirot said. But his tone suggested he found the explanation less than satisfactory. I looked out into the auditorium. The house lights had risen, revealing faces turned towards the stage. In the third box, Lady Frances Markham had vanished. She must have departed the moment Elena fell. Sir Adrian remained visible, gripping the rail with white knuckles, his face stricken. The stage manager appeared, giving orders in a shaking voice. "Clear the stage. Notify the authorities. Send for the coroner." Poirot touched my elbow gently. "Now, come, Hastings. There is nothing more to be learned here tonight." He paused, turning back to regard the fallen singer. "Though I think, mon ami, that this evening's performance has told us much, if only we have the wisdom to listen." We made our way through the confusion. As we emerged into the night air of Kensington, I drew a deep breath. The fog had thickened, and the street lamps created pools of hazy light. "What did you make of it, Poirot?" I asked as we walked. "A tragic accident, surely. The doctor seemed quite certain." My friend said nothing for several paces. Then he stopped beneath a lamp and turned to face me. His expression was grave. "Tell me, Hastings, that final note, how long did it last?" I considered. "I'm not sure. 20 seconds, 30 perhaps." "Precisely. It went on too long." He tapped his forehead. The little grey cells, they remember what was rehearsed. I read the review in the Times. The critic attended the dress rehearsal. He made particular mention of that final note. 8 seconds, Hastings. 8 seconds of sustained perfection. I don't follow. Tonight, that note lasted more than 3 times as long. Not artistry, my friend. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Agony. A cab rattled past. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck the quarter hour. I stood frozen, the implications settling over me like the cold mist. I think, mon ami, that we have witnessed not a failure of the heart, but something far more deliberate. He raised his stick to hail an approaching cab. Tomorrow we shall see what the cold light of day reveals. But tonight I am quite certain of one thing. What's that? That was not performance, Hastings. He met my eyes with absolute certainty. That was murder. Chapter 2. The diamond vanishes. The morning papers made a meal of it. I sat at breakfast the following day, scanning the headlines whilst Poirot attacked his perfectly soft-boiled egg with geometric precision. The Times had relegated the matter to page 3. Tragic death of celebrated soprano, and attributed the cause to natural failure of the heart. The Daily Mail proved more sensational, featuring a photograph of Elena Vassiliou in full costume and speculating about the curse of artistic temperament. They know nothing, Poirot murmured, not looking up from his egg. Or they know much and say little, which, Hastings, amounts to the same thing. You still believe it was murder. I believe in facts, the prolonged note, the clutching at the throat, the scent I detected upon the stage. Scent, very faint. Almonds, perhaps, or something that wishes to smell like almonds. He set down his spoon with finality. Detected near her dressing table, not on the stage itself. Most curious. We shall see what the day brings, mon ami. Often it is the morning after that reveals what the evening concealed. The doorbell rang before I could respond. Our landlady's voice drifted up the stairs, followed by heavier footsteps than hers. A moment later, Sir Adrian Markham stood in our sitting room. In the grey light of morning, the diplomat appeared diminished. His face carried the weight of sleepless hours, and his usual composure had developed cracks. He declined the chair Poirot offered, choosing instead to stand by the window. Monsieur Poirot, I require your assistance in a most delicate matter. I am at your service, Sir Adrian. What I tell you must remain absolutely confidential. My position at the Foreign Office, indeed the stability of certain international relations, depends upon discretion. Poirot inclined his head. You have my word. Sir Adrian drew a breath. Last evening, before the performance, I presented Miss Vassiliou with a gift, a diamond brooch in the shape of a lark. It was seen by several witnesses. Her dresser, the stage manager, Mrs. Denham, who manages her affairs. I observed it myself, I interjected. Magnificent piece. Blazed like fire under the stage lights. Quite. Sir Adrian's jaw tightened. This morning I received word from the coroner's office. The brooch has disappeared. It was not found on Miss Vassiliou's person, nor anywhere in her dressing room, nor backstage. Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. Is most curious. And the value of this diamond? Considerable. But that is not what concerns me, Monsieur Poirot. He turned from the window, and I saw genuine fear in his face. The brooch was commissioned by a foreign government as a gesture of goodwill following recent negotiations. Its disappearance could be interpreted as an insult. Worse, as theft of state property. The diplomatic consequences. I comprehend. Poirot steepled his fingers. You wish me to recover this brooch quietly, without involving Scotland Yard or the newspapers? If that were possible, yes. I would be deeply grateful. And Miss Vassiliou's death? Does that not concern you equally? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sir Adrian's face flushed. Naturally, I am distressed by the tragedy, but the doctor was quite clear. Heart failure. These things happen, particularly to those who live at such intensity. He cleared his throat. The diamond, however, is a matter of immediate diplomatic urgency. Poirot studied him for a long moment. Very well. I shall make inquiries. But I must have complete freedom to investigate as I see fit. Of course. Anything you require. Then we begin with Miss Vassiliou's lodgings. You know the address. Sir Adrian provided it. An address in Regent's Park, suitably elegant for a woman of her stature. After he departed, I turned to find Poirot standing motionless, his green eyes distant. Well, I said, a straightforward theft, I should say. Someone saw an opportunity in the confusion and took it. Perhaps. Or perhaps, mon ami, we mistake the cart for the horse. He reached for his hat. Come, that we visit the dead. The house near Regent's Park spoke of success tempered by taste. Elena Vassiliou had occupied the first floor, a suite of rooms that overlooked the garden. The landlady admitted us with the air of someone overwhelmed by sudden notoriety. Such a shock, gentlemen, such a terrible shock, and now the police and questions and, oh, it's most distressing. We shall be brief, madame, Poirot assured her. The sitting room retained its occupant's presence. Sheet music lay scattered across the piano, a silk shawl draped over a chair. Photographs in silver frames lined the mantelpiece. Elena in costume, Elena accepting flowers, Elena with various dignitaries whose faces I half recognized. The bedroom proved more intimate. A dressing table held the usual feminine paraphernalia. Hairbrushes, cosmetics, perfume bottles. Poirot examined each item with minute attention. You seek the brooch? A voice said from the doorway. I turned. A man stood there, tall, lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in artistic disarray. His eyes were red-rimmed, his collar askew. Despite his dishevelment, something in his bearing suggested intensity held barely in check. Monsieur Nikolai Petrov, I presume, Poirot said. You presume correctly. His accent carried the weight of Eastern Europe. I was Elena's accompanist. For 15 years, we performed together. And now, his voice cracked, my condolences, monsieur. The loss must be profound. Profound. The word is meaningless. She was genius made flesh. And they speak of heart failure, as though genius could be extinguished by something so mundane. He advanced into the room. You investigate the theft. Yes? The missing diamond, among other matters. Then I tell you this. Elena wore that brooch when she collapsed. I saw it. Everyone saw it. It blazed at her throat like a star, and now they say it has vanished. He laughed bitterly. Someone took it from her body, from a dead woman. What kind of person does such a thing? That is what we intend to discover, Poirot said gently. You were close to Miss Vassiliou. Did she have enemies? Enemies? Elena. Petrov's expression shifted. She had rivals, certainly. Other sopranos who envied her voice. Critics who found her interpretation too modern. But enemies? No, who could hate such beauty? And yet someone removed the brooch. A thief. A common thief who saw opportunity. Petrov turned away. Forgive me. I should not be here, but I could not stay away. These rooms, they still hold her perfume, her presence. Soon they will empty them, pack away her life into boxes, and it will be as though she never existed. After he left, Poirot moved to the dressing table. He opened drawers, examined contents, lifted bottles to the light. Then he paused. Hastings, the velvet case. He held it up, a small case lined with pale silk. Empty now, but clearly designed to hold jewelry. Poirot examined the interior closely, then lifted it to his nose. Most interesting. What is it? Crystals, tiny fragments, almost invisible, and a particular scent. He produced his pocket magnifier and peered at the fabric. Not quite diamond dust, I think. Something else. Something that tells Poirot much. Such as? He snapped the case shut and slipped it into his pocket. Such is the fact that this theft is not what it appears, that the brooch matters for reasons beyond its value, and that Miss Vassiliou's death and the diamond's disappearance are not separate events, but two halves of the same equation. You've lost me entirely. Not lost, mon ami, merely trailing behind as is your custom. He smiled, but his eyes remained serious. We must speak with others who knew Elena Vassiliou. The impresario, the theatre physician, Lady Markham herself. Someone knows what happened last night. Someone who saw more than they realize, or who realized more than they wish to admit. We descended the stairs in silence. At the door, I glanced back at the windows overlooking the garden. Behind that glass, a life had been lived. Ambition, art, passion, all extinguished now, are reduced to rooms that would soon be rented to another tenant. Poirot, I said as we reached the street, do you truly believe the death and the theft are connected? He adjusted his hat against the morning drizzle that had begun to fall. I believe, Hastings, that when a woman dies wearing a diamond and that diamond vanishes, one must ask the essential question, which is, not who took the diamond. His eyes met mine with perfect clarity. But why the diamond needed to disappear at all. Chapter 3. Tangled Loyalties. The Markham residence in Belgravia spoke of wealth worn lightly. No ostentation, no gilded excess. Merely the quiet assurance of generations who had never needed to prove anything. A butler admitted us without expression and led us through corridors lined with portraits of distinguished ancestors. Lady Frances Markham received us in the morning room. She sat beside a window overlooking the garden, a piece of embroidery forgotten in her lap. The grey silk she had worn the previous evening had given way to dove blue, but her elegance remained unchanged. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. She gestured to the chairs opposite. My husband mentioned you would call. I assume this concerns poor Elena. And the missing brooch, Lady Markham, Poirot said. Ah, yes. So the diamond. Her needle resumed its work, threading through linen with practiced precision. Adrian is quite beside himself about it. Diplomatic complications, state property, all rather tedious, really. You do not share his concern. I share his concern for appearances. The substance matters rather less to me. She looked up, and I saw intelligence in those grey eyes. You wish to know about Elena, of course. Everyone does. The brilliant soprano, the tragic death, the mysterious circumstances. How theatrical it all sounds. You knew Miss Vassiliou well, I understand. Once. We were at school together in Switzerland, an age ago now. Elena showed promise even then, though we never imagined what she would become. The needle paused. She changed, naturally. Success does that. One day you're sharing confidences over hot chocolate, as the next you're reading about each other in newspapers. Yet you maintained contact. Sporadically. Elena moved in artistic circles, I in diplomatic ones. Different worlds, Monsieur Poirot, though they occasionally intersect at events like last night's performance. Her voice carried no emotion, but something flickered across her face. We were not as close as we once had been. And your husband? Was he acquainted with Miss Vassiliou? The needle stopped entirely. Lady Frances set down the embroidery with deliberate care. My husband's position requires him to cultivate relationships with prominent figures, artists, intellectuals, those who influence public opinion. Helena was celebrated across Europe. Naturally, they were acquainted. The brooch he presented to her, it held significance beyond mere courtesy. Everything Adrian does holds significance beyond the surface. That is what makes him valuable to the Foreign Office. She rose and moved to the window. The brooch was commissioned as part of certain negotiations he conducted in Eastern Europe. A gesture of goodwill, he called it. I called it an expensive trinket designed to flatter a woman already sufficiently convinced of her own importance. The bitterness in her tone surprised me. Poirot, however, merely inclined his head. You disapproved? I disapprove of waste, Monsieur Poirot. Resources squandered on gestures when substance would serve better. She turned back to face us. But I am not consulted on matters of state, and I'm merely the diplomatic wife who hosts dinners and makes pleasant conversation and pretends not to notice when my husband's work requires flexibility. Flexibility in what regard, madame? In all regards. Her smile held no warmth. Now, if you have no further questions, I have morning calls to make. One moment, if you please. Poirot stood. Last evening, when Miss Vassiliou collapsed, what did you observe? What everyone observed. A woman singing, then falling, the audience's confusion, the terrible moment of realization. And your husband's reaction. She hesitated, and in that pause I saw calculation. He was shocked, naturally. We both were. He left the box before the curtain fell. Did he? I confess I was too distressed to notice such details. She moved toward the door. I'm afraid I cannot help you further, Poirot. I know nothing of missing diamonds or the circumstances of Elena's death. I'm simply a woman who lost a childhood friend and finds herself caught in complications not of her making. The butler appeared as if summoned by telepathy. Lady Frances offered us a cool smile and departed, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender and something I could not quite identify, perhaps regret, perhaps relief. Well, I said once we stood outside, she certainly seemed. Careful, Poirot supplied. Yes, very careful indeed. Each word chosen, each pause calculated. Lady Markham is a woman who has learned to navigate dangerous waters, Hastings. She reveals nothing she does not intend to reveal. You think she knows more than she admits. I think she knows much and admits little, which, as I said this morning, amounts to the same thing. He consulted his watch. We must now visit Mrs. Denham, the impresario who managed Elena Vassiliou's career. Such persons see what others miss. They must to survive in their profession. Mrs. Clara Denham maintained offices in Piccadilly above a music publisher's shop. The reception room held signed photographs of her various clients, singers, actors, musicians, all gazing out with the confident expressions of those who believed the world owed them attention. Mrs. Denham herself proved a contrast to these glamorous images. She was a compact woman of perhaps 50, dressed in severe black, her grey hair pulled back without softness. Her eyes assessed us with the speed of long practice. Monsieur Poirot, I wondered when you might call. She gestured us to chairs without preamble. I assume Adrian Markham engaged you about the brooch. You are well informed, madame. I make it my business to be informed. Information is currency in my profession. She opened a leather folder on her desk. Elena's contracts, correspondence, scheduled for the next 6 months. All worthless now, of course. Theaters will want refunds. Other artists will scramble to fill the void. Such is the nature of the business. You seem remarkably composed regarding Miss Vassiliou's death. I am remarkably practical regarding all deaths, Monsieur Poirot. Grief is a luxury I cannot afford. She closed the folder with finality. Elena was my most profitable client. Her death represents a considerable loss of income. But tears will not restore her. Nor will they settle the accounts left outstanding. You knew her well as anyone knows the artists they represent, which is to say, not well at all. Mrs. Denham's mouth thinned. Elena possessed extraordinary talent and extraordinary demands. She required constant management, her temperament, her contracts, her personal affairs. Everything fell to me to arrange and smooth over. Personal affairs? Poirot leaned forward. You refer to romantic entanglements? I refer to complications that threaten to interfere with her career. Elena collected admirers the way other women collect jewelry, enthusiastically and without regard for consequence. She paused. But I am not a gossip, Monsieur Poirot. My clients' private lives remain private. Even in death, unless those private lives connect to her murder. The word fell like a stone into still water. Mrs. Denham's composure cracked for just an instant. Murder? The newspapers said heart failure. The newspapers say what they are told to say, but Poirot, he knows better. He rose. Tell me, Mrs. Denham, the diamond brooch that Sir Adrian presented to Elena. Had you seen it before last evening? No, though I knew he intended to give her something. He mentioned it when he arranged for backstage access. And Elena's reaction when she received it? Mrs. Denham's expression shifted to something almost like satisfaction. She was pleased, naturally. What woman would not be pleased by such a gift? Though I noticed she examined it rather closely before putting it on, almost as though she were looking for something. Looking for what? That, Monsieur Poirot, you must determine yourself. I deal in performances and contracts, not in mysteries. She stood. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have cancellations to manage and creditors to pacify. Death, I have learned, generates considerable paperwork. Outside once more, I drew a breath of cleaner air. The interviews had left me with a peculiar sensation, as though everyone we spoke to was reciting lines from a script they had memorized. They're all hiding something, I said. May we? The question is whether they hide the same something or different somethings that merely appear connected. Poirot tapped his walking stick against the pavement. Lady Markham guards her dignity. Mrs. Denham guards her reputation. Sir Adrian guards his career. So, and in the middle of all this guarding lies one dead soprano and one missing diamond. What do we do now? Now, mon ami, we visit the good Dr. Bly and discuss the medical facts. His eyes glinted. For facts, unlike people, do not know how to lie. Chapter 4. The Mechanism of Death. Dr. Howard Bly's consulting rooms near Harley Street reflected their occupant's character. Methodical, orderly, and utterly without sentiment. The walls held medical certificates in plain frames. The desk bore only essential items arranged at precise angles. Even the clock ticked with clinical precision. The doctor himself matched his surroundings. He greeted us with the detached courtesy of a man accustomed to discussing mortality over tea. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I expected someone might call regarding Miss Vassiliou's death. He gestured to chairs. Though I confess I'm uncertain what I can add to what I've already reported. The official report states heart failure, Poirot said. Cardiac arrest, yes. Sudden, dramatic, and tragically final. Dr. Bly settled behind his desk. The symptoms were unmistakable. The collapse, the absence of pulse, the fixed pupils. I pronounced her deceased at the scene. You examined her closely. As closely as circumstances permitted. The stage, the crowd, the confusion, not ideal conditions for a thorough examination, but I saw no reason to suspect anything beyond natural causes. Poirot's fingers formed their characteristic steeple. And yet, Doctor, when I mentioned the scent of almonds last evening, you grew uncomfortable. Dr. Bly's composure flickered. His hand moved to adjust papers that required no adjustment. Did I? I don't recall. The memory of Hercule Poirot, it is most reliable in such matters. Poirot leaned forward. Almonds, Doctor. Dear scent that might suggest certain alkaloid poisons. Cyanide, for instance. I am aware of the association. Dr. Bly's voice took on an edge. However, the coroner found no evidence of poisoning in his preliminary examination. The viscera showed no discoloration, no chemical burns, no indication of toxic ingestion. Ingestion? No. But there are other methods of introduction, are there not? The clock ticked 3 times before Dr. Bly responded. Theoretically, yes. Absorption through skin contact, inhalation of vapor. But such methods would require direct exposure to concentrated poison. Hardly the setting for a public performance. Unless, Poirot said softly, The poison was delivered by something she wore, something pressed against her skin throughout her performance. The silence stretched like wire pulled taut. Dr. Bligh's face had gone pale. That would be extremely sophisticated. The dosage would need precise calculation. Too much and death would occur instantly. Too little and the victim might survive. The mechanism would require... He stopped, seeming to realize he had said too much. Would require knowledge of chemistry and timing, yes. Poirot stood and walked to the window. Tell me, Dr. Bligh, when you examined Miss Vassiliou, did you notice any marks upon her throat? Any discoloration where the brooch rested? The light was poor. I cannot say with certainty. Cannot or will not? Dr. Bligh rose abruptly. Monsieur Poirot, I have answered your questions to the best of my ability. If you suspect foul play, so you should direct your inquiries to Scotland Yard, not to a theatre physician who happened to be present when tragedy struck. But you were more than merely present, were you not? You were summoned backstage before the performance began. Mrs. Denham mentioned it in passing. Something about Miss Vassiliou feeling unwell. Artists often feel unwell before performances. Nerves, tension, the demands of their craft. Dr. Bligh moved toward the door. I gave her a mild sedative, nothing more. Certainly nothing that would have caused her death. Poirot turned from the window. No one has suggested you gave her anything fatal, Doctor. Why do you assume such an accusation? The question hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Bligh's hand rested on the door handle, his knuckles white. I assume nothing, and I merely wish to be clear about my role in this matter. He opened the door. Good day, gentlemen. I have patients to attend. We descended the stairs in silence. Once on the street, I expelled a breath I had not realized I was holding. He knows something, I said. He knows much. Whether he comprehends what he knows, that is another question entirely. Poirot hailed a cab. To Scotland Yard, if you please. It is time we consulted with our good friend Japp. The journey passed quickly. I found myself replaying the interview, noting the moments when Dr. Bligh's composure had cracked. Poirot sat beside me, his green eyes focused on some interior landscape I could not penetrate. Chief Inspector Japp received us in his cluttered office with a mixture of relief and exasperation I had come to expect. Poirot, thank God. This Vassiliou business has the commissioner in a state. Foreign Office breathing down our necks, newspapers asking questions, and a dead soprano who may or may not have been murdered. He gestured to chairs already occupied by files. Move those, or sit on them. I'm past caring. The investigation progresses, Poirot inquired. If you call running in circles progress, then yes, splendidly. Japp rubbed his face. The coroner's report shows nothing definitive. Could be heart failure, could be poison, could be divine intervention for all we know. The laboratory is running tests, but these things take time. And Sir Adrian Markham? Japp's expression darkened. Now there's a kettle of fish. The man's been under discreet observation for months. Nothing we can discuss officially, you understand. Concerns about his activities in Eastern Europe. Questions about whose interests he truly serves. Intelligence work? Or something masquerading as intelligence work. The line blurs at those altitudes. Japp pulled a file from the chaos. What I can tell you is that Sir Adrian has been passing information through diplomatic channels, documents, photographs, who knows what else, all perfectly legal on the surface. But there are whispers, Poirot. Whispers about secrets traded and allegiances questioned. And Miss Vassiliou's connection to this? That's what has everyone nervous. A British diplomat gives a valuable brooch to a celebrated soprano hours before she dies. The brooch vanishes. The soprano is dead. And now you're asking questions about poison and murder. He leaned back. What have you found? Poirot described the crystalline dust in the velvet case, the prolonged final note, the scent of almonds. Japp listened with increasing gravity. You think the brooch itself was the murder weapon? I think the brooch was more than decoration. The crystals suggest tampering, the scent suggests cyanide, and the symptoms— Poirot tapped the desk. They suggest Miss Vassiliou was poisoned slowly throughout her performance, the toxin released gradually against her skin. Good Lord! Japp stood and paced to the window. But who would construct such a thing, and why? If someone wanted her dead, there are simpler methods. Ah, but simplicity is not always the goal, mon ami. Sometimes the method itself carries meaning. Poirot joined him at the window. Consider, Elena Vassiliou dies wearing the gift from Sir Adrian Markham. The gift then vanishes. What does this accomplish? It implicates Sir Adrian. Or it protects him by removing evidence, or— Poirot paused. It retrieves something the brooch contained beyond its mere beauty. What do you mean? The Lark was hollow, I think. A vessel as well as an ornament. Mrs. Denham told us Elena examined it closely before wearing it, as though searching for something. What if the brooch concealed a compartment? What if Sir Adrian used it to carry secrets across borders, hidden within the metal bird? Japp's eyes widened. And Elena discovered this. Perhaps, or perhaps someone else discovered it and could not allow such knowledge to survive. Poirot turned from the window. We must know more about the brooch itself. Who commissioned it? Who designed it? What its true purpose was? And we must discover what happened in the moments after Elena fell, when the theater descended into chaos and a diamond vanished from a dead woman's throat. Japp reached for his coat. I'll request the jeweler's records, though if this involves state secrets, getting information will be like pulling teeth from a crocodile. Do what you can, my friend. Meanwhile, Hastings and I will pursue other avenues. Poirot moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Japp. The missing mechanical component, the Lark's body. If the brooch is recovered, that piece will be absent. Remember this. Why would someone take only part of it? Because that part, mon ami, contained what they truly sought. The diamonds were mere camouflage. His eyes glinted. We hunt not for a thief of jewels, but for a thief of secrets, and perhaps for a murderer who kills to keep those secrets buried. We emerged into the grey afternoon. Rain threatened from clouds that pressed low over London's rooftops. Poirot stood motionless on the yard steps, his head tilted as though listening to music only he could hear. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I am thinking, Hastings, that we have been examining this case as one examines a puzzle, looking for pieces that fit, but what if we are asking the wrong questions?" "What questions should we ask?" "Not who killed Elena Vassiliou." He started down the steps. "But who needed her dead enough to commit murder in front of 500 witnesses?" Chapter 5. The Gathering Storm. The telegram arrived at tea time. Poirot read it twice, his expression unreadable. Then he reached for his hat with the decisiveness of a man whose questions had finally found their answers. "We go to Sir Adrian's residence, Hastings. Immediately." "Now, but it's nearly 5 o'clock. Precisely the hour I requested in my message this morning." He handed me the telegram. "Sir Adrian has agreed to assemble all parties concerned. Lady Markham, Mrs. Denham, Nikolai Petrov, and Dr. Bly. They will be expecting us." "You've found something?" "I have found many things. Whether they assemble into truth or merely into plausibility, that we shall discover tonight." His green eyes held that peculiar intensity I had learned to recognize. "Come, mon ami, the final act awaits." The drawing room at the Markham residence had been arranged with theatrical precision. Chairs formed a semicircle facing the fireplace, where Sir Adrian stood like a man awaiting execution. Lady Frances occupied a position near the window, her posture betraying nothing. Mrs. Denham sat rigid in a high-backed chair, her black dress making her appear carved from shadow. Nikolai Petrov paced near the door, unable or unwilling to remain still. Dr. Bly had positioned himself apart from the others, his medical bag resting at his feet as though he expected casualties. Poirot entered with the confidence of a conductor approaching his orchestra. I followed, taking a position that allowed me to observe all present. "Thank you for accommodating this gathering," Poirot began. "I know it is irregular, perhaps even uncomfortable. But murder, mes amis, cares nothing for comfort." "Murder?" Sir Adrian's voice cracked slightly. "The coroner has not declared—" "The coroner declares what the evidence permits him to declare, but evidence it can be made to lie. Or rather, to remain silent." Poirot moved to the center of the semicircle. "Let us speak of Elena Vassiliou. A woman of extraordinary talent, yes, but also a woman who discovered something that made her death necessary." Petrov stopped pacing. "What did she discover?" "Secrets, Monsieur Petrov. Secrets carried in silver and diamonds, hidden within the body of a mechanical lark." Poirot turned to Sir Adrian. "The brooch you presented to Miss Vassiliou? It was more than a diplomatic gift, was it not?" Sir Adrian's face had gone the color of old parchment. "And then I don't know what you're suggesting." "I suggest nothing. I state facts." Poirot produced a slip of paper from his pocket. "This morning, Chief Inspector Japp obtained information from the jeweler who created your brooch. A remarkable piece of engineering. Hollow construction, a small compartment within the bird's body, accessible only to those who knew the mechanism. Perfect for carrying microfilm across borders, yes?" The silence in the room pressed like a physical weight. "Elena discovered this," Poirot continued. "Perhaps by accident, perhaps through curiosity. She examined the brooch closely before wearing it. Mrs. Denham witnessed this. And what did she find? A diplomatic courier disguised as an admirer, using her fame as cover for espionage." "That's absurd," Sir Adrian said, but his voice carried no conviction. "Is it? You traveled frequently to Eastern Europe. Elena performed throughout the continent. Your paths crossed often. Convenient for a man who needed to pass information without suspicion." Poirot's tone remained gentle, almost sympathetic. "She threatened to expose you unless you ended this arrangement, and perhaps ended other arrangements as well." Lady Frances spoke for the first time, her voice like frost. "Other arrangements, Monsieur Poirot? Your husband's liaison with Miss Vassiliou. A relationship that served multiple purposes. Personal pleasure and professional necessity intertwined. Most efficient, though perhaps not most honorable." Sir Adrian's hands gripped the mantelpiece. "You have no proof of any of this." "On the contrary, and I have the proof that matters most. The knowledge that someone could not allow Elena to speak." Poirot paused. "So that person ensured she never would." "How?" Mrs. Denham leaned forward. "The doctor said heart failure. There was no poison found." "Because the poison was not ingested, madam. It was absorbed." Poirot moved toward the fireplace. The brooch itself became the murder weapon, a small reservoir of cyanide dust hidden within the clasp mechanism. When fastened against Elena's skin, the heat of her body, the perspiration of performance, these released the poison slowly into her bloodstream. Dr. Bly's face had gone gray. "That would require sophisticated knowledge of chemistry and timing." "Indeed. Too much and death occurs instantly, arousing immediate suspicion. Too little and the victim survives to tell what she knows. But the correct dosage, released gradually during a performance lasting nearly 2 hours." Poirot spread his hands. "The symptoms would appear natural. Heart failure brought on by the strain of singing, the emotion of performance. Who would question such a diagnosis?" "This is monstrous," Petrov said, his voice thick with emotion. "You accuse someone in this room of constructing such a device, of planning Elena's murder with such precision." "Not constructing, monsieur. Modifying." Poirot's gaze swept across the assembled faces. The brooch existed already with its hidden compartment. Someone merely added a second chamber, one that held not microfilm, but death. Lady Frances rose from her position by the window. Her movements held the grace of a dancer, each gesture controlled. You speak of chemistry and timing, Monsieur Poirot. You speak of modifications requiring knowledge and opportunity. She crossed to stand beside her husband. Surely such requirements narrow your field of suspects considerably. They do, madame. They narrow it most significantly. Then perhaps you should name this person and spare us all further speculation. Her eyes met Poirot's without flinching. Or do you prefer to draw out the suspense for dramatic effect? I prefer, madame, to understand motivation before I speak of guilt. Poirot turned to address them all. Elena Vassiliou died because she threatened to expose secrets. But which secrets? Sir Adrian's espionage, his infidelity, or something else entirely? What else could there be? Mrs. Denham asked. That is what puzzled Poirot for some time. A woman dies wearing a brooch designed to carry secrets, and the brooch then vanishes. Why? To destroy evidence of the murder method, certainly. But also, he paused, to retrieve what the brooch still contained. The microfilm Sir Adrian had hidden there, perhaps evidence of his activities, evidence that would prove useful to certain parties. Sir Adrian's composure finally shattered. This is intolerable. I won't stand here and be accused of... Of what, Sir Adrian? Poirot's voice cut like a blade. I've accused you of nothing but indiscretion and poor judgment. The murder, that is a different matter entirely. Then who? Petrov demanded. If not Sir Adrian, then who had the knowledge, the opportunity, the reason to kill Elena? Poirot walked slowly to the center of the room. Each step measured, deliberate. When he spoke again, his voice had softened to barely above a whisper. Consider the crime, mes amis. Not merely who could commit it, but who would commit it in precisely this manner. A method that appears natural. A method that removes evidence while retrieving valuable secrets. A method that protects certain interests while punishing certain betrayals. He stopped, his gaze settling on one face after another. Tell me, where was the brooch on the afternoon before the performance? Before Sir Adrian took it to the theatre? In my study, Sir Adrian said. In the safe where I keep diplomatic materials. And who had access to this safe? No one. The combination is known only to myself. And your wife, perhaps. Lady Frances's expression did not change. I've never needed access to my husband's professional affairs. But you are an intelligent woman, madame. A woman who has lived alongside diplomatic work for many years. A woman who knows that sometimes the safety of the realm requires actions that appear, how shall I say, unseemly. Poirot's voice remained soft, but each word landed with precision. A woman who studied chemistry at university, if I am not mistaken. The room seemed to contract. I found myself holding my breath. Many women of my generation were educated, Monsieur Poirot. It hardly makes us poisoners. No, madame, but combined with opportunity, with motivation, with the particular skills required. He withdrew the velvet case from his pocket. The crystalline residue found in this case has been analyzed. It matches cyanide compound prepared with a binding agent. The laboratory notes that the preparation suggests someone with formal training in chemistry, and not merely amateur knowledge. Lady Frances's composure finally showed a crack. Her hand moved to touch the pearls at her throat. I think, madame, Poirot said gently, that it is time to speak the truth. Chapter 6. The Truth Behind the Glitter. The silence that followed Poirot's words stretched like a wire pulled taut. Lady Frances stood perfectly still, her hand resting against her pearls. Then, with a movement that suggested release rather than defeat, she walked to the chair by the window and sat. Very well, Monsieur Poirot. You wish for truth. I shall provide it. Her voice remained steady, though something had shifted in her eyes, a veil lifting to reveal what lay beneath. But you must understand the context, or you will mistake the nature of what occurred. I'm listening, madame. She folded her hands in her lap with the precision she brought to every gesture. I discovered Adrian's affair with Eleanor 3 months ago. A letter carelessly left in his study. These things happen in marriages such as ours, marriages built on position rather than passion. I was prepared to ignore it as I had ignored previous indiscretions. Sir Adrian flinched but said nothing. Then I learned the rest. Lady Frances's gaze moved to her husband. The documents in his briefcase, the late-night meetings, the brooch with its clever hidden compartment. My husband was not merely having an affair, he was using his mistress as an unwitting accomplice in espionage. "You confronted him?" Poirot asked. He did. He explained the necessity, the service to the realm, the delicate negotiations that required such methods. I might have accepted even that. Her voice hardened. But then Elena discovered the brooch's true purpose. And she told Adrian she would expose everything unless he ended both the affair and his intelligence activities. She gave him 1 week to comply. "The performance was on the 8th day," I said. "Precisely, Captain Hastings. The 8th day, when Elena intended to make good on her threat. She had already contacted a journalist friend, had arranged to provide documentation of Adrian's activities." Lady Frances looked at Poirot. "My husband's career would have ended. Worse, certain sensitive negotiations with Eastern European governments would have collapsed. Men's lives were at stake, Monsieur Poirot. Networks of resistance, people who had risked everything to provide intelligence to Britain. So you killed her to protect these networks?" Poirot's tone held no judgment. "I killed her to protect what mattered. My family, yes. Adrian's career, certainly, but also the work itself. Work that, however distasteful the methods, served a purpose larger than any one woman's moral outrage." She drew a breath. "I learned chemistry at university. I understood the properties of cyanide, how it could be prepared, how it might be administered through skin contact over time. The brooch provided the mechanism. How did you access it? Adrian's safe combination is his mother's birthday. He has used the same numbers for 20 years. Hardly sophisticated security." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "I removed the brooch 5 days before the performance. I had the clasp modified by a jeweler, not the one who created the original piece, naturally. A man in Whitechapel who asks no questions. He added a tiny secondary chamber to the clasp. He fitted with a mechanism that would release its contents gradually when exposed to heat and moisture." Mrs. Denham had gone very pale. Dr. Bly stared at his hands. Petrov remained frozen, as though unable to process what he was hearing. "The cyanide was prepared in my laboratory," Lady Frances continued. "I maintain a small chemistry setup in the garden house. Adrian thought it an amusing hobby for a diplomatic wife. I mixed the compound with a binding agent that would ensure slow release. The dosage required precise calculation. Too much would kill instantly. Too little would merely sicken." "You aimed for death during the performance," Poirot said. "I aimed for death that would appear natural. Heart failure brought on by the strained performance. Who would question such a diagnosis? Artists die young from the intensity with which they live. Helena would be mourned, her death attributed to the very passion that made her great, and the secrets she threatened to reveal would die with her." "But the brooch disappeared," I said. "You took it from her body." Lady Frances met my eyes. "I did. In the confusion after she collapsed, while everyone rushed forward and the curtain descended, I left my box immediately. I knew the backstage corridors. I had attended parties here before, when Adrian cultivated theatrical connections. The stage door was unguarded in those first chaotic minutes. Everyone was focused on Elena, on calling for doctors, on trying to understand what had happened." "You reached the stage?" Poirot asked. "I reached the wings. Close enough. For the body had not yet been moved. Dr. Bly was still examining her, pronouncing her dead. In the press of people, the shadows backstage, no one noticed one more figure in evening dress." She paused. I knew the brooch had to be removed. It contained evidence of both the poison and the hidden compartment. I could not allow either to be discovered. When the doctor stood and began giving orders, when attention shifted to clearing the stage, I stepped forward as though I were another concerned onlooker. My hand touched her throat, unfastened the clasp. The movement took seconds. Then I withdrew into the crowd and made my way back to my box before anyone could question my absence. And the mechanical lark? Poirot's voice remained gentle. The hollow bird that contained the microfilm? I separated it from the clasp and the diamonds. Of the stones I have hidden, they will be found eventually, returned to the Foreign Office with some plausible story of confusion. But the lark itself, with its secret compartment... She looked at Sir Adrian. I destroyed it, melted it down to slag. Whatever secrets it carried, whatever intelligence Adrian thought so valuable, is gone forever. Sir Adrian's face had gone beyond pale to a kind of grey translucence. Francis, you don't understand what you've done. That microfilm was more important than a human life, than justice, than simple decency. Her voice cut like a blade. I understood perfectly what I did, Adrian. I committed murder, but I did so in full knowledge that what you had done, using an innocent woman as a courier, endangering her without her knowledge or consent, valuing secrets over her safety, was itself a kind of murder. Slower, perhaps. Less direct, but murder nonetheless. Poirot moved to the window. Outside, dusk had begun to settle over London streets. You speak of justice, madame, yet you appointed yourself judge, jury, and executioner. I speak of necessity, Monsieur Poirot. The choices available to me were all terrible. Allow Elena to expose my husband and destroy work that protected lives? Stand by while she shattered networks that took years to build, or act decisively, terribly, to prevent greater harm? She stood. I chose. I do not ask for understanding or forgiveness. I simply ask that you comprehend the impossibility of the position in which I found myself. And the sedative? I asked, remembering. Dr. Bly gave Elena a sedative before the performance. Dr. Bly's head snapped up. I knew nothing of this. Miss Vassiliou was agitated, distressed. I gave her a mild dose to calm her nerves. I swear I had no knowledge of... He did not, Lady Frances said. The sedative was unfortunate coincidence, though not entirely unexpected. I knew Elena suffered from stage nerves before major performances. I knew Dr. Bly was the theatre physician, that he would likely be summoned. The sedative may have prolonged her suffering slightly, slowed the poison's action, made her death appear even more gradual and natural. But it was not part of my design, merely a fortunate circumstance that worked in my favour. Poirot turned from the window. You have been most forthcoming, Lady Frances, but you have not answered the essential question, which is whether you feel remorse for what you have done. The question hung in the air. Lady Frances looked at each person in the room, her husband, the pianist who had loved Elena, the businesswoman who had profited from her, the doctor who had failed to save her. Finally, her gaze returned to Poirot. Remorse suggests I wish I had chosen differently, but given the same circumstances, the same impossible choices, I would act the same way. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. So no, Monsieur Poirot. I do not feel remorse. I feel only the terrible weight of necessity. The door opened. Chief Inspector Japp entered, flanked by 2 constables. He had been waiting in the hall, listening. I realized this had all been arranged beforehand. Lady Frances Markham, Japp said formally, I am arresting you for the murder of Elena Vassiliou. She nodded once, and then gathered her gloves from the table with the same care she had brought to her embroidery. Sir Adrian moved toward her, but she raised her hand. Don't, Adrian. There is nothing you can say that will make this easier for either of us. She turned to Poirot. Will they hang me? That, madame, is for the courts to decide, but your confession, your cooperation, these will be noted. How comforting. The bitter irony in her voice was unmistakable. I murdered to protect my husband's career and my country's interests. Now I shall be hanged to satisfy their sense of justice. There is a symmetry to it, I suppose. As Jap led her toward the door, she paused beside Nikolai Petrov. The pianist had remained silent throughout, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. She was brilliant, and she deserved better than to be caught in games played by lesser people. If it helps at all, she felt no pain at the end. The poison worked exactly as I designed it to work. Her final note was not agony, but artistry. That much at least I could give her. Then she was gone, leaving behind only silence and the weight of choices made and prices paid. Sir Adrian sank into a chair, his face in his hands. Mrs. Denham departed without a word, her expression suggesting rapid calculations about damage to her business. Dr. Bly gathered his medical bag and fled. Only Petrov remained, standing by the piano where Elena had once played during parties at this very house. He touched the keys gently, producing a single note that hung in the air like a question without answer. Poirot and I made our way to the street. Now the evening had turned cold, and fog was beginning to gather in the squares and mews. "She told the truth, then?" I asked as we walked. "All of it?" All that mattered, yes. Though perhaps not all that was true. Poirot adjusted his coat. Lady Frances killed to protect her husband and his work, but she also killed because Elena Vassiliou had what she herself had lost: passion, freedom, the ability to choose her own path. That, I think, was the deeper motive. Not patriotism, not duty, but envy dressed in the costume of necessity. Will they show mercy? That depends, mon ami, on whether the courts value honesty or whether they prefer their murderers to grovel and repent. He hailed a passing cab. Lady Frances will not grovel. She will go to her fate with the same dignity she brought to everything else. And perhaps that is the truest tragedy, that dignity without conscience is merely another form of pride. We rode home in silence, the case closed but leaving behind questions that would never find answers. In the end, Elena Vassiliou had died for the crime of discovering truth, and Lady Frances Markham would hang for the crime of believing some truths were worth killing to protect. The scales of justice, I reflected, rarely balanced in ways that satisfied anyone. Epilogue. What the Lark Carried. 3 weeks had passed since Lady Frances Markham's arrest. The newspapers had handled the matter with surprising discretion. A brief notice that a diplomatic wife had been charged in connection with the death of Elena Vassiliou, followed by a discreet silence that suggested official intervention. The Foreign Office, it seemed, preferred its scandals buried rather than examined. I sat in our familiar sitting room, reading the day's paper whilst Poirot examined his morning correspondence. The fire burned low in the grate. Outside, October rain drummed against the windows with the insistence of a question repeatedly asked. "It says here that Sir Adrian has resigned his position," I said, folding the paper. "Gone abroad." "Switzerland, apparently." A wise choice. Poirot set aside a letter without opening it. London would be most uncomfortable for him now, the whispers, the knowing looks. Better to remove himself from the scene of his failures. "Do you think he loved her?" "Elena, I mean." "Love?" Poirot considered the word as though it were a specimen requiring careful examination. He desired her, certainly. He found her useful, undoubtedly. But love, that requires a capacity for selflessness I do not think Sir Adrian possessed. He loved what she could give him: pleasure, cover for his activities, the reflected glory of her fame. But Elena herself? None, I do not think so. I stared into the fire. The case had left a taste like ashes in my mouth. "Lady Frances goes to trial next month," I said. "Jap tells me she refuses to plead for mercy, and she intends to present her full confession and accept whatever judgment follows." she will maintain her dignity to the end. It is, perhaps, all she has left. Poirot rose and moved to the window. The newspapers report that Elena Vassiliou died of heart failure. The public will never know the truth, that she was murdered by a diamond lark that sang poison into her veins. A brilliant life ended for the sake of secrets. It seems such a terrible waste. Poirot turned from the window. The grey light cast his face in shadow. Not for the secrets themselves, Hastings, for what those secrets represented. He moved back to his chair. Consider, Lady Frances did not kill merely to protect her husband's career, or even to safeguard intelligence networks. She killed because Elena threatened to expose the careful fiction upon which her entire life was built. I don't follow. Lady Frances had spent her marriage playing a role, the dutiful diplomatic wife, the woman who overlooked indiscretions, who sacrificed personal happiness for position and duty. Elena's threatened exposure would have revealed that all these sacrifices were for nothing, that her husband's work was not the noble service to the realm she had convinced herself it was, but rather a sordid entanglement of espionage and adultery. Poirot tapped his forehead gently. The little grey cells? They tell Poirot that Lady Frances killed not to protect a secret, but to protect herself from the truth of her own wasted years. The fire crackled. Rain continued its percussion against the glass. She said she felt no remorse, I said quietly. She said many things, mon ami, but Poirot, he heard what she did not say, that she envied Elena her freedom, her art, her ability to choose truth over comfortable lies. Lady Frances had spent her life in service to duty and propriety. Elena lived for passion and integrity. When confronted with such a contrast, Lady Frances chose to eliminate what she could never possess. I thought of the silver lark, collapsed on stage with her final note still hanging in the air. I thought of Lady Frances, sitting in her cell with the same dignity she had brought to her drawing room. Two women, both trapped by the choices they had made, both destroyed by the secrets they carried. Diamonds may sparkle brilliantly in the light, Poirot said softly, as though reading my thoughts. They catch the eye, they promise beauty and permanence. But it is secrets, Hastings, that truly cut. Secrets carried, secrets concealed, secrets that demand blood payment to remain hidden. And the mechanical lark? The one Lady Frances destroyed? Gone forever, melted to nothing, whatever intelligence it carried, whatever diplomatic secrets Sir Adrian thought so valuable. All lost. Perhaps that is just as well. Some secrets deserve to die rather than be preserved at such cost. He picked up the newspaper and turned to less troubling matters. A review of a new symphony, a report on the unseasonably wet weather, the mundane affairs of a city that continued its rhythms regardless of individual tragedies. Come, mon ami, he said, setting the paper aside once more. I see there is a new production at Covent Garden, a revival of La Traviata. Perhaps we shall attend. Though this time, his green eyes held a glint of something between humor and sadness. This time we shall simply enjoy the music and leave the mysteries to others. You think you can resist investigating if something untoward should occur? Ah, Hastings, you know me too well. But let us hope, for the sake of both music and my nerves, that this performance ends only with applause and encores, not with death and diamonds. I smiled, though the weight of the case still pressed upon my thoughts. Outside, the rain began to ease. Somewhere in London, Elena Vassiliou would be buried with full honors, her death attributed to the very artistry that had made her famous. Somewhere else, Lady Frances Markham waited for a trial that would end with rope and scaffold, her dignity intact, but her life forfeit. And in a sitting room in London, Hercule Poirot returned to his correspondence whilst his friend contemplated the terrible arithmetic of justice, where passion and duty, secrets and truth, love and envy all tallied to a sum that satisfied no one. The lark had sung its final song, The diamond had scattered its last light, and the secrets they carried had exacted their price in full measure, as secrets always do. The final note has faded, and the illusion has been stripped away. Behind brilliance and diplomacy lay calculation, envy, and a secret too dangerous to survive discovery. This volume now returns to the shelves of the hidden library, its truth recorded, its glamour undone. If this mystery stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Until another story is brought forward, remember, when power and pride intertwine, even the brightest stage can become a place of quiet ruin.